In the heart of the fertile lands of Asa Kingdom, there lived a young woman named Mary. Her beauty was unmatched, and her wealth seemed to know no bounds. She lived in a grand house surrounded by servants and admirers who would do anything to be close to her. She was the jewel of the kingdom, and her presence turned heads wherever she went. The village women whispered behind her back, wondering how she seemed to have it all: the perfect looks, a loving family, and an enviable lifestyle. But while others admired her, envy was a constant shadow. Every man in the kingdom dreamed of marrying her, and she was constantly showered with gifts, gold, jewelry, and fine fabrics. Mary, however, had no idea of the jealousy that simmered beneath the surface. She was too focused on the life she was leading. But even in her paradise, something always seemed missing. Despite all her wealth and beauty, she longed for something deeper, someone to share her life with, someone who would truly see her, not just the image the kingdom adored. Mary's heart had always been open to love, but there was a subtle emptiness that no amount of riches could fill. Her closest friends urged her to take her time, warning her that many men only sought her for her wealth. But Mary, in her innocence, believed in the power of love. She knew that, one day, she would find someone who was worthy of her heart. It wasn't long before her prayers were answered. A handsome young man named Chijioke arrived in Asa Kingdom. He was wealthy beyond measure, and his charm was undeniable. The moment he laid eyes on Mary, he knew she was the one. His riches had earned him the admiration of many, but he had never been as drawn to a woman as he was to Mary. He quickly made it known that he intended to marry her, and the kingdom buzzed with excitement. But what Mary didn't know was that Chijioke's wealth didn't come from honest means. He had made a dark pact with forces beyond human comprehension, selling his soul in exchange for the prosperity he enjoyed. As the grand wedding day approached, Mary was swept up in a whirlwind of excitement. The people of Asa Kingdom were thrilled by the union, and the kingdom was filled with festivities. Chijioke, with his wealth and power, was the perfect match for her, handsome, strong, and capable of offering her a life of luxury. The day they were married was the happiest day of Mary's life. They danced, laughed, and dreamed of the future together. Mary couldn't imagine a life more perfect than the one she was beginning with Chijioke. But behind closed doors, Chijioke carried a heavy secret. Though Mary believed he had earned his wealth through hard work and clever investments, Chijioke's prosperity was the result of a pact with dark forces. Years ago, he had visited a powerful witch doctor who had promised him boundless riches in exchange for a terrible price. The doctor had instructed him to perform rituals using the blood of his future children to seal the pact. Chijioke, desperate for wealth, had agreed. He had traded his soul for the promise of a life beyond his wildest dreams. But the cost was far more than he could have imagined. As the years went on, he found himself bound by the pact, unable to escape the consequences of his choices. The rituals, performed in secrecy, took a toll on Mary's health and her future. The first few years of Mary's marriage to Chijioke were blissful. They traveled, celebrated, and built a life of luxury together. But as the years passed, Mary found herself yearning for more. She had everything she had ever dreamed of except for one thing: a child. She longed to become a mother, to hold a child in her arms and nurture them, but despite her best efforts, tragedy struck each time she became pregnant. Mary's first miscarriage was devastating. She had been so excited, so hopeful, that this time would be different. But at the third month, her joy was ripped away, and she found herself empty once again. Chijioke was there, comforting her, telling her that it was all in God's plan. But even his reassuring words couldn't ease the pain in her heart. The second time, the same thing happened. The pregnancy had seemed promising, and Mary allowed herself to hope once more. But once again, she lost the child, her dreams dashed, and her heart broken. With each loss, she became more desperate, questioning why this was happening to her. Was it her fault? Was it some curse that had been placed upon her? Despite the pain, Chijioke continued to support her, his words always filled with love and understanding. "God's time is the best, my love," he would tell her, and Mary would find solace in his embrace. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder what was truly going on. She had everything except the one thing that seemed to matter most. As Mary's despair grew, the whispers in the village grew louder. Her friends, once supportive and understanding, began to question her. Why hasn't Mary had a child yet? They asked behind her back. What is going on in that marriage? Why does she keep losing babies? The gossip spread like wildfire, and soon, even her family began to question her. Mary, once adored by all, became the subject of judgment. Every time she went out, the stares and whispers followed her, and the weight of the kingdom's expectations bore down on her. She tried to stay strong, but the isolation and pressure began to take its toll. In desperation, Mary turned to a powerful native doctor, Obinze, who was known for his ability to heal and protect. He assured her that the rituals he could perform would keep her next pregnancy safe. Though she felt a pang of doubt, her longing for a child overpowered her fears. She placed her trust in Obinze, hoping that this time, things would be different. 2 months later, Mary found out she was pregnant again. She felt a sense of hope and relief, but there was also a nagging feeling that she couldn't shake. Chijioke's restlessness had grown, and Mary sensed that something was amiss. What she didn't know was that her husband, desperate for more power and wealth, had begun to view the unborn child as nothing more than a tool for his dark rituals. Mary's heart swelled with joy when she discovered that she was pregnant once more. After years of loss and heartache, this pregnancy felt different, like the blessing she had been waiting for. She felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. She began to plan for the child she had always dreamed of raising. This time, she could feel a connection to the life growing inside her, and she whispered promises to the unborn child every night. However, Chijioke's demeanor continued to change. There were moments when he seemed distant, almost cold, and Mary couldn't understand why. She asked him if everything was all right, but he reassured her that he was simply preoccupied with his business matters. Still, a nagging sense of unease lingered in her heart. She trusted her husband, but the more she tried to ignore her instincts, the stronger the feeling became. Despite Chijioke's strange behavior, Mary clung to the hope that this pregnancy would be the one. She spoke to the child every day, telling it of the beautiful life they would have together. She made plans for their future, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream without fear. But the darkness that had been lurking in their marriage was far more powerful than Mary realized. Chijioke was not just distant, he was hiding something that would shatter their lives forever. Chijioke's secret had been eating away at him for years. He had grown richer and more powerful than he could have ever imagined, but it came at a heavy price. The pact he had made with the dark forces had bound him to a terrible fate. He had sacrificed his children, Mary's unborn children, to fuel the rituals that had secured his fortune. Each miscarriage had not been a tragedy of nature, but a consequence of the rituals he had performed in secret. With each child that was lost, Chijioke grew stronger, his wealth increasing exponentially. But there was a cost: his soul, his humanity, and his peace. He had once believed that the power he gained would make him invincible, but over time, he realized that the darkness he had invited into his life was not something he could escape. The guilt weighed heavily on him, but he could not break free from the grip of the dark forces that held him. Now, with Mary pregnant again, Chijioke knew what was at stake. This child would be the final piece in his ritual, a final sacrifice that would solidify his power forever. But there was one thing he did not foresee: the child Mary was carrying was destined for something far greater than he could ever imagine. The day Mary gave birth was a day of both joy and horror. As the midwives cried out in delight, Mary held her baby in her arms, a beautiful baby girl, with soft, delicate features. But as Mary looked into her daughter's eyes, her heart sank. There was something wrong, something she couldn't explain. Sarah's eyes, though wide and bright, were unseeing. She was blind. In that moment, Mary's joy turned to confusion. She had prayed for a healthy child, one who would bring light into her life. But the sightless eyes of her daughter filled her with a deep, unshakable sadness. She couldn't understand why this had happened, why the child she had prayed for had been born with such a cruel curse. Chijioke, who had been standing by her side, remained silent. His face was unreadable, but inside, he felt a cold satisfaction. This blind child, this cursed child, was the price he had paid for his riches. The ritual was complete. Mary, overwhelmed by grief and confusion, held Sarah tightly to her chest, desperate to protect her from the darkness that seemed to surround them. She had no idea that her daughter's blindness was not a curse, but the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Days passed, and Chijioke's health began to deteriorate rapidly. His once strong and commanding presence withered before Mary's eyes. His skin grew pale, his body weak, and his spirit seemed to fade with each passing day. Mary, terrified for her husband's life, sought the help of healers and doctors, but none could explain the rapid decline of his health. It was then that Chijioke confessed the truth to Mary. In a hoarse whisper, as he lay on his deathbed, he revealed the dark secret that had haunted him for years. "Mary," he said, his voice trembling with guilt, "I am the one who caused your miscarriages. I used our unborn children for rituals to maintain my wealth. I'm sorry." Mary's world came crashing down. She had loved Chijioke with all her heart, and yet, he had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. He had sacrificed their children for power, children that could have been their future. The weight of his confession was too much for her to bear. Her heart broke into 1,000 pieces as she looked at the man who had once promised her the world, now reduced to a mere shadow of the man he had been. As Chijioke's life slipped away, Mary realized that the life she had once believed was perfect was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Her marriage had been built on lies, and the man she had trusted had deceived her in the most painful way. Word of Chijioke's death spread like wildfire through the kingdom. The villagers, who had once looked up to him and admired his wealth and power, were horrified by the revelation. They whispered about the terrible pact he had made with the dark forces, and soon, the kingdom's once adoring citizens began to turn away from Mary. "This family is cursed," they said. "Who knows what evil Chijioke did with that baby to make her blind? This is evil." The whispers grew louder, and soon, Mary found herself ostracized from the very community she had once been a part of. Her wealth and status meant nothing now. She was nothing more than a woman whose husband had brought destruction to their lives. The shame of her past clung to her, and she began to feel the weight of her isolation. Feeling lost and rejected, Mary made a decision. She would leave the kingdom, leave behind the memories of her past, and try to start over somewhere far away. But the choice she made would come with a heavy price, a price that would forever change the course of her life and the life of her daughter. With her heart filled with despair and regret, Mary made the painful decision to abandon her daughter, Sarah. Believing that the child was a symbol of the curse that had ruined her life, she took Sarah to the evil forest, a place feared by all. There, she left her daughter, hoping that by doing so, she could escape the shame that had taken over her existence. Before she left, Mary made a small mark on Sarah's body, a symbol that she could recognize her daughter should fate ever bring them together again. It was a small gesture, but one that Mary hoped would bring her comfort in the future, should she ever find a way to heal the wounds of her past. As Mary walked away from the forest, a sense of finality settled in her heart. She had abandoned her child to fate, but deep down, she knew she would never be able to escape the guilt of what she had done. Dimka had been tracking a deer deep in the forest when he heard the faint sound of a baby's cry. At first, he thought it was some sort of animal in distress, but the sound tugged at his heart, urging him to investigate further. Following the noise, he soon came upon a tiny, helpless infant lying alone on the ground. The baby was Sarah. Dimka's heart ached as he looked down at the child, abandoned in the woods, vulnerable and fragile. The forest was a dangerous place, especially for a helpless baby. He couldn't understand how anyone could have left her there. Without hesitation, Dimka picked Sarah up and cradled her in his arms, vowing to protect her from whatever darkness had led to her abandonment. As Dimka made his way back to his humble home, he couldn't help but wonder about the child's story. Who would leave their baby in such a terrifying place? He felt a deep responsibility for her, and in that moment, he knew that he would raise her as his own, no matter what. The village may have feared the evil forest, but Dimka was determined to turn it into a place of refuge for this innocent soul. Dimka's home was simple, but filled with warmth and love. He had no wife, no children of his own, but he had always dreamed of becoming a father. Now, with Sarah in his care, he was determined to give her everything she needed to thrive. He cared for Sarah as though she were his own daughter, tending to her every need with patience and devotion. Over the years, Dimka's bond with Sarah grew stronger. He He taught her the ways of the forest, how to track animals, and the importance of kindness and respect for nature. Despite her blindness, Sarah showed an incredible intelligence and curiosity, always eager to learn more from her adoptive father. Dimka never spoke of the day he had found her in the forest, as he did not want to burden her with the darkness of her past. Instead, he focused on nurturing the bright, kind soul she was becoming. Sarah, in turn, adored Dimka and viewed him as the father she had never known. In their small, quiet home, they found happiness in each other's company. The forest that had once seemed so intimidating had become a safe haven for Sarah, a place where she could explore, learn, and grow. As Sarah grew, so did her wisdom. She was bright, perceptive, and quick to grasp new concepts. Despite her blindness, her mind was sharp, and her understanding of the world around her was remarkable. She could read people's emotions through their voices, and her other senses seemed heightened, compensating for what she could not see. One day, while Dimka was working outside, a strange man came into their village. He was a man of faith, a powerful priest who had traveled far and wide to spread his message of healing and hope. When he saw Sarah, something stirred within him. He believed that the girl was destined for something greater, and he felt moved to offer a prayer of healing. When Sarah stood before the priest, he laid his hands on her forehead and prayed fervently. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and Sarah felt a sudden, inexplicable warmth spread through her body. As the prayer came to an end, the priest stepped back, gazing at Sarah with astonishment. For the first time in her life, Sarah opened her eyes and she could see. The world around her, once shrouded in darkness, suddenly burst into vibrant color. She looked at Dimka, tears welling in her eyes, and whispered, "I can see, Father. I can see." Dimka, who had been standing nearby, gasped in disbelief. He had always believed in the goodness of the world, but never in his wildest dreams had he imagined that Sarah's blindness would be healed. The priest smiled warmly, his faith in the divine power reaffirmed. It was a miracle, a gift from the heavens. The news of Sarah's miraculous healing spread quickly throughout the village. People marveled at the sight of the girl who had once been blind but now saw the world as they did. Many wondered how such a thing could happen, and some whispered that it was a sign of great destiny. Sarah herself was overwhelmed by the newfound gift of sight, but she remained humble, knowing that her life was forever changed. With her vision restored, Sarah began to see the world in a completely different way. She became more independent, more confident in her abilities. Yet, even with her sight, she never forgot the lessons Dimka had taught her. She remained grounded, understanding the value of hard work, kindness, and empathy. But as Sarah's reputation grew, so did her sense of responsibility. She felt a deep urge to help those in need, to make a difference in the world around her. The healing she had experienced was not just physical, it was spiritual, and Sarah knew that she was meant to do something more than just live a quiet life in the forest. It wasn't long before word of Sarah's miraculous healing reached beyond the village. A famine had struck the kingdom of Asa, and the people were desperate. The king, in an effort to save his kingdom, made a public proclamation. Whoever could help the kingdom overcome the famine within a year would be rewarded with half of the kingdom's wealth and an honorary title. Sarah, now 15 years old, felt a stirring in her heart. She had always been someone who believed in solutions, in taking action when needed. She had learned that, though the world could be harsh, there was always a way to make things better. She could use her intellect and resourcefulness to help the kingdom. With determination in her heart, Sarah made the bold decision to step forward. She would face the challenge head-on, not for the reward, but because it was the right thing to do. With the knowledge she had gained from Dimka and the insight she had gathered from observing the world around her, she devised a plan that would bring the kingdom back from the brink of disaster. Sarah's plan was simple but bold. The famine had devastated the kingdom, and the people were struggling to survive. With the right resources and management, the kingdom could be saved, but the approach needed to be different. Sarah's idea was to utilize the kingdom's vast land for sustainable farming practices and to introduce new crops that could withstand harsh conditions. She also proposed setting up a community-wide network where the people could work together, pooling their resources to support one another. By sharing food and labor, the entire kingdom could work toward rebuilding their strength, rather than leaving anyone behind. Sarah's proposal emphasized cooperation, innovation, and collective responsibility. Sarah's knowledge of business policies and practical solutions gave her the confidence to present her plan to the king. She knew it would not be easy to convince the rulers, but she had faith in the power of the people and their willingness to fight for their survival. She gathered support from local farmers, traders, and those with influence in the kingdom, building a strong coalition of people ready to help implement her vision. When Sarah presented her plan to the king of Asa, he listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. The king had seen many proposals over the years, but none that seemed as well thought out or as practical as Sarah's. He was impressed not only by her intelligence but by the way she carried herself, strong, confident, and determined. Sarah spoke with passion about the need for unity and innovative thinking. She knew that the kingdom could not simply wait for the famine to end on its own. Action needed to be taken immediately. The king was moved by her words and, after much deliberation, he decided to place his trust in her. "I am willing to give you a chance, Sarah," the king declared. "If you can help this kingdom rise from the ashes, as you say you can, I will reward you handsomely. Half of my wealth and a title worthy of your efforts will be yours." The king's decision was met with mixed reactions. Some courtiers doubted a young woman's ability to lead, but Sarah's reputation had already started to shine, and the people began to rally behind her. Sarah wasted no time putting her plan into action. She worked tirelessly to coordinate with the farmers, local merchants, and villagers, encouraging them to plant the crops that were most likely to survive the dry conditions. She introduced new irrigation techniques that would conserve water and help the crops grow despite the lack of rainfall. In addition, she established a network of food banks throughout the kingdom, where surplus food could be shared among those in need. Sarah's leadership began to inspire hope in the hearts of the people. They worked together, side by side, to implement her ideas, and little by little, the kingdom began to show signs of recovery. As the months passed, Sarah's plan began to take shape. The famine slowly started to recede as the kingdom's resources were carefully managed. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was progress, and for the first time in a long while, the people of Asa began to feel that they had a future. By the end of the year, Sarah's efforts had transformed the kingdom. The famine had finally been defeated, and the crops that had been carefully tended to flourished. The people of Asa were no longer starving, they had food to eat, and they were beginning to rebuild their homes and businesses. The king, deeply impressed by Sarah's success, held a grand ceremony in her honor. In front of a large crowd, he declared that she would be named the Mayor of Asa, a position that was not only an official title but a testament to her hard work, ingenuity, and commitment to the well-being of the kingdom. Sarah was overwhelmed with emotion as the king presented her with a ceremonial sword and the title of mayor. It was a recognition of all that she had done, but Sarah knew that the true reward was in seeing the people of Asa smile again, seeing the kingdom rise from the ashes. As Mayor of Asa, Sarah was determined to continue her work, ensuring that the kingdom flourished and that no one would ever again suffer the way they had during the famine. She continued to push for progress and innovation, seeking ways to improve the lives of the people in every corner of the kingdom. Sarah's leadership was marked by compassion and foresight. She set up programs to support local businesses, encouraged education, and created opportunities for women and children to thrive. Under her leadership, Asa transformed into a prosperous and vibrant kingdom, and Sarah became a symbol of hope and resilience. But despite her success, Sarah knew that her work was far from over. The kingdom was still in its infancy, and there were many challenges to overcome. She remained committed to ensuring that Asa remained a place of growth, opportunity, and unity. In the years following Sarah's rise to power as mayor, Asa Kingdom flourished more than ever before. Business boomed as people from neighboring kingdoms traveled far and wide to do trade with Asa. The kingdom had become a hub for commerce, farming, and exporting goods, and Sarah, always eager to see her people succeed, decided to take an ambitious step. She introduced a new initiative to help the sons and daughters of Asa who had left to start their lives elsewhere. Sarah set up a loan program for anyone wishing to invest in their businesses and expand their trade. From farming to buying and selling, even to exporting goods to distant lands, The loan program was a lifeline for many who wanted to build something meaningful for their families and the kingdom. The result was remarkable. Men and women returned from every corner of the world to Asa, eager to seize the opportunities Sarah had made possible. Families, young entrepreneurs, and old veterans of business came back to rebuild, reinvigorating the kingdom with fresh life, hope, and ambition. As the years went by, Sarah's efforts brought prosperity to Asa, but for one person, life had only grown more difficult. Mary, who had run away from Asa 20 years ago, found herself struggling in the city, unable to boast of any significant achievement or progress in her life. For all her wealth and beauty, she had never built anything lasting or meaningful. Now, at a point where desperation loomed large, she made a decision. She would return to her roots, to the place she had once fled. She had heard about the growth of Asa Kingdom and the success of its people, and she decided to go back home, seeking forgiveness from her parents. In her heart, she longed for a second chance, an opportunity to start over, perhaps by joining the other sons and daughters of Asa to take part in the loan program and finally build a life for herself. However, when Mary arrived in her village, she was struck with devastating news. Her parents had passed away 10 years ago, mere months after she had left. The weight of regret settled in her chest, heavy and suffocating. Without her parents, there was no one left to turn to for the forgiveness she so desperately sought. With the news of her parents' passing, Mary's heart was broken, but her need for redemption didn't waver. She made her way to their graves, her steps slow and deliberate. Standing before the tombstones of the people who had once loved her unconditionally, Mary knelt down, her tears mingling with the earth. "I am sorry, Mother. I am sorry, Father. I left you, and now you are gone. I should have come back sooner. Please forgive me for my mistakes. I didn't understand what I was doing, and I regret everything," she whispered through sobs. For a long while, Mary sat there in the graveyard, her body trembling with grief and shame. It was her last chance for reconciliation, but in that moment, she realized that forgiveness, in the way she had hoped, was no longer possible. Her parents were gone, and nothing she did could bring them back. The next day, Mary made her way to the palace. The news of Sarah's loan initiative had reached even the furthest corners of the kingdom, and Mary, feeling that this was her final chance to make something of herself, gathered her courage. She submitted her proposal for a loan to start a poultry and fish farming business. It wasn't a grand plan, but it was something, a small start, a chance to rebuild her life. When the day came for her to defend her proposal in front of Sarah and the kingdom's council, Mary felt a nervous excitement. This was her moment. As she stood before Sarah, explaining her plans, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the eyes upon her, all judging, all waiting to see if she could truly make something of her life. But as she spoke, something unexpected happened. Sarah, who had been listening intently, moved slightly to adjust her sleeve. That movement revealed a faint, but unmistakable birthmark on her shoulder. Mary's heart stopped. As Mary's gaze locked onto the mark, a flood of memories came rushing back. Her pulse quickened, and a cold sweat dripped down her back. The birthmark on Sarah's shoulder, it was the same mark she had left on her daughter all those years ago. The same mark she had branded onto her newborn before abandoning her in the evil forest. Without warning, Mary fainted. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground. The room erupted into chaos as the palace servants rushed to her side, attempting to revive her. Sarah, visibly shaken, stood up from her seat and asked, "What's wrong with her?" The servants worked quickly, and after a few tense moments, Mary began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring up at Sarah. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, with great difficulty, Mary whispered, I am your mother." The revelation echoed in the silence of the palace, and Sarah froze. The room seemed to darken, the air thick with tension. A murmur swept through the servants and the council, their whispers of disbelief turning to suspicion. The woman who had abandoned the helpless child, the woman who had run away from Asa years ago, was now claiming to be Sarah's mother. Sarah's face twisted with confusion, then shock, and finally, a deep, crushing pain. She recoiled from Mary, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. You can't be my mother. My mother died long before I was born. Or maybe she was already dead when I came into this world. Sarah's words cracked with emotion, and she took a step back. Mary, still on the ground, could barely look at her daughter. I didn't know what else to do. I was afraid of the curse, of the life I had chosen. I abandoned you in the forest, and now I see the consequences of my actions. Sarah's heart hardened as she looked at the woman who had left her to die. The years of pain, the struggle, the sacrifices, it all flashed before her eyes. And now, this woman, this stranger, was asking for forgiveness. Sarah's anger boiled over. How could you? How could you do that to me? How could you leave me there to die alone in the forest? She cried out, her voice filled with disgust. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of Sarah's words. Mary's face crumpled in anguish, and the once proud woman seemed small, broken. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her heart filled with a cold, bitter resolve. You have no place here. You abandoned me, left me to die in the forest. You are not my mother. You never were. With those final words, Sarah turned away, leaving Mary kneeling on the cold palace floor. Mary's eyes welled with tears, but she knew that no apology, no sorrow, could ever undo the damage she had caused. She had no one left now, not her parents, not her daughter, and not the kingdom she had once hoped to return to. As Mary left the palace in silence, the rumors of the bitter encounter spread quickly throughout the kingdom. No one looked at her the same way again, and Mary realized, with deep sorrow, that the woman she had abandoned in the forest had grown into someone too strong to ever forgive her. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Mary's past could never be erased. And Sarah? She would never allow herself to forget the cruelty of the woman who had claimed to be her mother.